Okay, so here's what will happen. I will read the shortest story from this book, which maybe will be of interest to people who work in the industry that you do, and then we'll kind of talk. The story is called Reality Apathy, and it is set in the near future. I'm guessing 3 to 5 years, but depending on how fast the culture accelerates. Also, just so you know, these are fiction stories. I usually write nonfiction, so I think some people assume that this is going to be nonfiction too. And I start reading these stories, and they're like, "What? There's a puma in the bathroom?" It's like, how could that be? Well, it can't be. But here we go. The text was from Susan, except that it obviously wasn't. It came from Susan's number and mirrored her syntax and referenced a conversation they'd exchanged a few weeks prior, but it also included the phrase, "weird flex, fam," a phrase Susan sometimes employed, but only as a means for making fun of people who use media aphorisms unironically. There was no possible way Susan could use such language earnestly while pleading for a temporary Venmo transfer. Still, the algorithm behind the text deserved kudos. It had managed to replicate Susan's distinctive misunderstanding of punctuation and her propensity for needing money at odd hours of the weekend. There was a depth of humanity to the spam that felt novel. Micah wasn't fooled because he was impossible to fool, but he was impressed. The machines were getting better at this. They were always getting better. You had to respect that. Had this happened 3 years ago, Micah would have told Susan to change all her passwords. Had it happened last summer, he might have told her to consider encryption. But there was no need for that nonsense now. It would only waste both of their time. A better alternative was to just stop communicating with Susan entirely, at least until the new phones arrived that fall. She wasn't the type of friend where private interaction was necessary. She rarely had original thoughts, and on the rare occasion she did, she wouldn't waste them on interpersonal conversation. She'd post them in public. Her value was always accessible. Micah walked and scrolled and walked and scrolled, his neck craned forward at a 120-degree angle. He toggled through time and space, learning all of the things. Here was the president, speaking to a gaggle of reporters on the White House lawn, eloquently criticizing a new single by Quavo. Probably not real. Here was some audio of Joel Embiid claiming Trae Young was addicted to crocodile. Probably not real. Here was a story about China considering an invasion of India. Maybe true? Probably not true. Here was a drone image of people sunbathing topless at the McMurdo Research Station on the continent of Antarctica. Probably not real. Here was a link to a sex tape involving the Archbishop. Probably not real. Here was someone reporting that Matt Damon was about to be arrested, including an embedded clip of Ben Affleck arguing for his innocence. That felt like a perhaps. Here was some footage of an alien mothership captured by a dashboard camera in Russia. Another perhaps. Downtown was so annoying these days. What was with all the moose holograms? They were everywhere now. Micah couldn't even remember if they were supposed to be advertising or if they were supposed to be activism. He'd read, or maybe he'd heard on a podcast, that a certain percentage of these moose holograms were not holograms. A 7-year-old child had been trampled on Hennepin Avenue. Or was it that the moose was real, but the kid had been a hologram? Were they doing that now? Keebler would know. He wouldn't know if the event had actually happened, but he'd know if people were saying that it did. He and Keebler were supposed to meet for hot turkey sandwiches at Keys at the Fauché, this is a cafe in Minneapolis, around noon, which meant 1:30. Micah still had 2 hours to waste, so he sat at a bus stop outside of the diner and looked through a few hundred baby pictures of himself before returning to the ecumenical scroll. Here was the Secretary of State having what appeared to be a stroke. Probably not real. Here was a list of 10 facts he supposedly didn't know about Harry Styles, except he knew 9 of them and at least 4 were definitely false. Here was a slideshow about illegal immigrants from Mexico being sold into slavery by legal immigrants from Norway. Probably not true. Here again was the Secretary of State stroking out, although this time from a different camera angle and without audio. Here was Mark Cuban looking directly into the camera and explicitly advocating Maoism. Probably not real. Here were 3 high-resolution images of an elderly woman masturbating with an assault rifle inside a Baptist church. Probably not real. Here was an octopus. Probably not real. Here was a biracial woman he'd seen before, live streaming herself from a cave, talking about the relationship between global positioning systems and pancreatic cancer. This one was 50-50. The next time he looked up, it was 10 minutes past 2. He could see Keebler through the frosted glass of the Key's front door, sitting in a booth, rewatching The Room on his wristwatch. Micah hustled inside and apologized for being late. Keebler said it was cool and that he didn't even know what time it was. You see the bishop taking the dirt road this morning? Nah, said Micah. I didn't need to see that. How was it? Smart, said Keebler. Seamless. But the action starts too fast and goes on for too long. It's overproduced. That's exactly what I thought about the Matt Damon thing, said Micah. You mean the stroke? That was fake. That was fake yesterday. No, the stroke wasn't Matt Damon, said Micah. The stroke was the other guy. What other guy? I can't remember, said Micah. Something supposedly happened to someone. It doesn't matter. A waitress with a beehive hairdo drifted over to the table and took their orders. Keebler wanted to finish the last 10 minutes of the movie, so Micah took filtered photographs of the various patrons throughout the restaurant. When he rechecked the image he'd taken of an elderly couple sitting by the window, he noticed the silhouette of a moose hologram in the distant background, reminding him of the inquiry he'd pondered 3 hours prior. I have a weird question, said Micah. GIF of Michael Jackson eating popcorn in the Thriller video, said Keebler. The urban moose holograms. Some of those holograms are real moose, right? Like 2% or something? I don't think so, said Keebler. Is that true? I thought there was a report about a little kid who got trampled on Hennepin. I guess I did hear that, said Keebler. Well, then the involved moose would have to be real, said Micah. You can't get trampled by a hologram. Is it possible they're all real? That can't be, said Micah. I probably saw 10 of them on my way over here. What would they be eating? Shouldn't there be moose shit all over the sidewalk? Wouldn't they constantly get hit by cars? You can't really hit things with your cars anymore, said Keebler. You basically have to try on purpose, and it still doesn't work. Well, maybe you're right, said Micah. I don't really keep up anymore. Maybe all the moose are real. But how come you only see them downtown? Shouldn't they be all over the suburbs? That's a good point, said Keebler. They're probably not real. The possibility of all those moose being moose never even occurred to me until now, said Micah. Now I'm always going to wonder. Every time I see a moose, I'll wonder if I'm seeing a moose. Don't worry about it, said Keebler. You can't worry about that stuff. It doesn't matter. The waitress arrived with their food. It wasn't what they ordered, but they ate it anyway.
That's a great taste of what this book is about. And I think we'll start with sort of a softball question.
Then there's going to be real hard ones later.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It's going to end my career by the end of this. It'll be like, why did I go to Google of all places? The best position to transmit my transgressions to the world. Yeah.
So I read a little bit about your writing process for this book.
Okay.
You compiled sort of a list of ideas over the course of 5 years. Mm-hmm. You then wrote this book over 1 year. You also set some limitations for yourself. There were what, 36?
There's 34 in the book.
Okay.
I had written 50, but the limitations she's talking about is, and I've kind of explained this a bunch of places, I had a real dumb idea. I don't know why I came up with this, but I had this decision. I made this decision. I was going to write 100 stories that were exactly 1,000 words long. That was going to be the whole thing with this book, right? Pot is legal in Oregon. So I don't know if that was a factor in this, but so I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write 100 stories, and they're all going to be 1,000 words long. So I'm doing it. I start working on it, and I'm realizing every story is either being pushed up to get to 1,000 or cut down to get to 1,000. So every story is at an unnatural length. Then I realize, of course, I'm going to deliver this book, and it's going to get edited and copy edited, and all the lengths are going to change, so I'm going to have to go back in and add words or subtract words to get it back to 1,000. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, also, this is stupid. Like, no one's going to buy a book because the stories are the exact same length. It doesn't really prove anything that I was able to do it outside that I have the ability to hit the button that counts the number of words in the story. So I was like, I'm just going to write these at the natural length. So, like, that's actually the shortest story in the book. I think that might be 900 words. Most of them are like 1,200 to 2,000. And I wrote one story a week for 50 weeks, and then I took the best 34 and made it into the book.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you knew the answer to that one. That was a good.
Well, yeah, it was about myself.
It's interesting. They're all about you. It's interesting because at Curating Music at Google, one of the things people used to ask is, are you curating sort of based on length of song or kind of these like arbitrary limitations? And we were like, no, it's about mood. It's got to be right.
Yeah, but mood is hard because that's a real, like, in some ways the obstruction is an advantage. You talking about curating music? I mean, I can't. It's really dark out there. I'm not sure what the age of most of the people here. I bet you're mostly younger than me. I'm 47, but some of you might be old enough to remember making mixtapes. And one of the skills of making a mixtape was having a large catalog in your mind of songs that were super short. When you ran out of space, like at the end of side 1, like the song All Nighter by Elastica is like a 2-minute and 6-second song, and that's a really great, or maybe it's a minute 40 or something. It was a good song to put at the end of side 1. So sometimes the obstructions actually make it more fun. I will concede that because I had what I once believed was this brilliant idea to write 100,000 word stories, it didn't get me motivated to start doing it. Like I wrote a bunch of them, and it didn't feel like I was writing as much as I was doing some kind of weird math. And that made it easier initially,
So you describe this book as sort of, this is how we get into your daydreams. You made a list.
Yeah.
Like this is really, you said this is your most personal book.
Well, I think it is. No one will think that, particularly since I've written memoirs. It doesn't make a lot of sense why this would be more personal. But the thing is, when I wrote those memoirs, it was like about my external life. It was like, here's what I'm doing. These are the people I'm with. This is the place I'm at. It's like kind of the world outside. This is really an internal thing. This is like what I think about when I'm in a room by myself, which happens a lot now because my life is very different. When I lived in New York, which was the last time I was here, it's very difficult to have an insular life in New York. Like the city almost demands you interact with it. But now I live in Portland, and many days, the only people I talk to are my kids, my wife, and maybe my kid's teacher. Like most of the day I'm in I got a cabin in my backyard, kind of like I used to say it's like a Ted Kaczynski cabin, but it's not really like that. It's like I have Wi-Fi, but I'm out there, I drop the kids off from school, and I come back and I go to the gym, and I like eat a bowl of soup, and I go out there at 10:30, and then I'm out there till 5, and that's just me, and I'd forgotten what that was like, Yep.
So some of these essays are in first person, some are in third person. Did that make a difference in writing them?
Well, first person is easier to do in some ways, and it's easier to be funny. It's easier to make people feel as though they understand the character. But the downside is that sometimes the first-person stories are perceived to be, this is just the author speaking. And because I have in some ways made the mistake of doing lots of things like this and doing lots of podcasts, people are real familiar with my voice. When I first started writing, people didn't know who I was, but they said my writing had a voice. But what that meant, if you don't know the author at all, you use the best version of your own voice in your mind. And then they find out what I sound like. Frankly, many people find my voice real fucking annoying. Like they think it's real kind of nasally, and like this is a person that seems like he's lecturing me about nothing, that negates sort of the benefit of the first person. Third person is more like classic fiction writing, because that really, you have multiple characters, you're all of them, you're inside their minds, you create all the action around them, you have to depict the setting in this way. So there is a difference, I guess, sure. But if every story in the book would have been first person, I don't know, I think that would have seemed, wouldn't seem like fiction so
Right.
much, yeah.
But you do infuse the book with some classic Klostermanisms, you know? So, like, for example, you described a fake song as a synthesis of whole celebrity skin in the opening theme to Sesame Street. That's classic you.
And you can imagine that, sort of.
Yeah.
And I think that there has been a long history in rock of songs that have been successful because they either unconsciously or latently replicate the theme to Sesame Street. There's a whole list of them. You know, the Green Day had a song like that. The Wilco song, like "Out of Sight, Out of Mind," sounds like it. You know, I think that there's a lot of people who that was the first song that they loved, and they end up becoming musicians. And then if you hear the guitar part of like "Hole," the Celebrity Skin, is like dun 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 dun, and you can imagine that being converted closer to Sesame Street. That was the song I was imagining.
It's like Grover's, like Courtney Love.
Maybe, yes.
Yeah. Well, I love those tidbits, and you do. I mean, it's interesting because it's almost a little bit of almost magical realism in this book. You call it sort of fictional, nonfiction.
Yeah, I mean, it's odd to say magical realism because I have a very specific image in my mind of what magical realism is, and in my mind, it's like often written by like a 60-year-old black woman, kind of. Like, I just had this image of what magical realism is. I never think of someone like me doing it, but yet it is. Magical things happen in a hard reality. That's what it is. Sometimes it's like you do something and then you realize you're obviously doing something and it was obvious to everyone but you, like you're the last person to find out. Yeah.
Is it easier to write fiction than nonfiction? Is it less research for you? Was it a lot of research?
No,
Did you have to go in and say, okay, well, I still have to...
It's definitely harder to write because, nonfiction is a reactive art form. So, like, if I was writing a non-fictional story about this experience, like, I could describe what you're wearing by looking at you and the way you're nodding your head, kind of, and how it affects your face and all these things. And I could look out and I can sort of see that guy's shirt, but not his face and all these little details. And what you're really doing is how accurately can you take the experience you had and make it into this thing. Whereas with fiction, you're just starting with a blank screen. And there's just, if there's a table there, you got to say what the table looks like, and you got to make up a table, which seems like it should be easy, but it's not. It's harder to make up things, particularly, or just even figuring out how long would it take, like, that guy, if he rushed across the room and attacked that guy. Like, how long would it take? How many seconds would that take, And then you got to think about it a long time, where... if it happened in reality, I would be like, we were talking, and mid-sentence, I could just describe what happened, and whatever I said would be easy because I was there, Yeah.
And that's kind of what these hypotheticals were like too, right? Because those were sort of...
Yeah, well, those were just, that's probably the strangest aspect of my career, I guess. So the second book I wrote was called Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs. And that was structured kind of formally like a mixtape, actually. But there were all these interstitial things in between all the stories. And one of them were like these 3 hypothetical questions I would ask people in conversation, when the book came out in softcover, they always want you to add something new to the book because that's easier to sell a new product or whatever. You can, I guess, theoretically sell it to somebody who already bought the other one, which seems really weird, but that's what they try. So I was like, well, I'll write 20 more of these. So instead of 3 questions, it'll be 23. And it'll be like the book was a new middle. That's how it was sort of pushed. And people responded to those questions. And then somebody from a different publishing house said, we want to republish those 23 questions with 27 more that you made up. And then we'll have this deck of cards. And then it was like for $5,000. And I was like, well, okay, sure, why not? I mean, they're fun to do or whatever, I guess. So I do it, and I didn't think much about it. Like, it just kind of, but those cards have sold more than almost all of my books. It's like 150,000 copies of those. They have them in vending machines in Japan. Like, somebody went to Japan and took a picture of it. Also, vending machine, I've never been in Japan, but like vending machines there are very interesting. Like, you can get like a beverage and these cards and underwear.
It's a good deal.
Like, and like a yo-yo, like all, like they just, there's no real, like there's no unifying aspect to the machine, So yes, those cards and I mean, they're just, it's just an odd thing. And sometimes, it's very weird. I went into a restaurant in South Carolina one time, like kind of a sports bar, and all the tables had them for people to read while they wait for food. That was a real interesting experience to walk into, and then I was like, the waitress comes, and I was like, I did this, and she's like, yeah. Okay. It's like she didn't know what I meant. Like, it's not a thing you expect someone to say, but yeah.
Should we do one?
If you want to do one, go ahead.
Should we pick a random one, or should I just pick the one I like?
Pick the one you like.
Okay. It's a quick one. You meet a wizard in downtown Chicago. The wizard tells you he can make you more attractive if you pay him money. When you ask how this process works, the wizard points to a random person on the street. You look at the random stranger. The wizard says, I will now make them $1 more attractive. He waves his magic wand. Ostensibly, this person does not change at all. As far as you can tell, nothing is different. But somehow this person is suddenly a little more appealing. The tangible difference is invisible to the naked eye, but you can't deny that this person is vaguely sexier. The wizard has one rule, though: you can only pay him once. You can't give him money. You can't keep giving him money until you're satisfied. So you can only pay him one lump sum up front. How much cash do you give the wizard?
Yeah, because my thinking of this came from sometimes you'll be with a group of people, like say in a bar or whatever, and someone will come in, and you will not think that they're necessarily attractive, but other people at your table will think they're attractive. And then you'll be like, maybe they are. Like somehow, like other people's opinions in a way can affect what, you start questioning your own, or the inverse. You can find someone attractive to other people who don't. So the idea of this wizard being like, I'm going to make this person $1 more attractive, and he goes, touche. And then you're like, well, I don't know how to describe it, but they are more attractive. Did he just sort of scam me? Like trick me into thinking this because he's real persuasive? Or did something happen? And then you're in a situation where well, okay, if there's a chance this is true, I got to think do I not like the way I look? I think everybody to a degree says yes to some varying degree. Some people a lot, some people a little. So then it would be, how much money would you give someone with the idea that you will become sort of intangibly more attractive? And I guess I would go to a cash machine and give them $200.
Oh, wow.
Well, the thing is, though, that's I don't know if I would have said that when I made up those cards. I had less money. That's part of it.
Cards change. You can redo them over
there's
time.
a bunch of things in those cards that have changed. One of these cards has to do with the idea of there's a machine that can tape your dreams. You hook this up to this machine that tapes your dreams. So the next morning you can wake up and you can watch all your dreams in totality, okay? But the hook is, for some odd reason, you can only do that with your family and friends. You can't just watch your dreams. The first time you see them, your friends and family are also going to see all your dreams. Would you do that? Now, that's a good question, because it's well, can you be blamed for your dreams? Are there secrets that you don't even want to know you're sleeping on? But the weird thing is that in the cards, it's called the Dream VCR. So when a young person gets these cards, they're always trying to so is it virtual reality and there's a C in them? They have no idea,
So there needs to be a version 2.
I guess. Well, there's supposed to be one.
Oh, great.
There's supposed to be one that's not exactly like that, but a similar one. And I've come up with the questions, but I don't know what's going on with the process.
So do you feel like when people read these stories or do the hypotheticals, you're trying to lead people, or at least give some people something to think about, right? Something to go off of. And do you sort of have, especially in this book, are you trying to guide people to particular conclusions, or are you really trying, again, to set up almost impossible quandaries that you've been thinking about?
Sometimes in nonfiction, you're trying to lead people to a conclusion, not with these things. I mean, these are interpretive stories, and they're subjective, and the main goal from me is to have them be interesting and have them be entertaining, and also have a level of clarity, which is to say that a lot of times, one thing I don't like about a lot of fiction is the emphasis from the writer seems to be on kind of the density and the construction of the prose for the benefit of other writers. They almost want the reader to feel like this book is good because it took me a while to figure out what was happening, or I don't really dig that. I want to get to the idea, so I put a lot of effort in having the stories be clear. I'm not trying to persuade people to think anything though. Like and I think that's a little odd, especially since I spent so many years as a critic, and a lot of other critics don't really get why, like they think that their job is to be a tastemaker, or to sort of promote things that they think deserve to be promoted and pull down things that they think are sort of a social. I don't feel that way. I mean, I just think it's interesting to think about life. It's fun to write about it, and that's as far as it goes for me.
So in terms of being the ethicist, when you were the ethicist versus being a critic, you're trying to leave people sometimes with more questions than answers.
Well, that was when I had that job. I mean, that was a hard job. It wasn't hard to do, but it was kind of a hard experience to have, because the risk reward was totally out of balance. It was like, the risk was, if I fuck this up, my career is over. The possible reward was someone going, "Oh, that was okay this week." Like, that was the best you could expect, you know? And that was also different in that like, sometimes people were asking me real serious things, like about their grandma with dementia and all these things. So I tried to take it seriously, and I wanted to be great at it. I wanted to be like the Johnny Carson of that and just do it, but I was only okay. And I was glad when it was over. I mean, I felt I was bummed out a little bit, but I was also happy. My wife was very happy, because what would happen is I would do that, you know, I would write it for the New York Times Magazine, and it would be all, you know, but the New York Magazine is printed a week and a half in advance. So I would spend all this time working on these responses, and then it would be locked, and then I just had to wait. And all I could do was reread what I already wrote, knowing I couldn't change it. And I hated that. It was just a terrible experience.
So
I don't even like thinking about it, because I was so worried about it. I was just so, you know, and I was also doing something that was a little unnatural, because my natural inclination as a writer is to try to kind of be entertaining and engaging and like goofy and like, oh, that's funny. And you can't always do that. Like, I would like it when I had a question where I could, and sometimes if there were 3 questions, one could be funny, but there had to be, people expect that column to be something that makes them think deeply about a real ethical problem that might exist in their own life as well as somebody else's, you know.
Okay, so what ethical problem is plaguing our society the most today, and did you write about it in this book?
What ethical problem is plaguing? I think in a way it is, I don't know if this is the worst problem, but one I do think about, one that is probably in the book, has to do with, is a person's personality, is their value, is their merit, based on who they are or what they express? In other words, it's like, if you express ideas about politics, or ideas about art, or feelings about how sports should be organized and all these things, are those things your ideas, and they're a little separate from you? They're just something that your mind has put together and you have expressed them and you agree with them? Or is that who you are? And is it possible that, or is it, I guess, justifiable and ethical to hate someone or dislike someone because you disagree with their expressed view about something that technically has no relationship to either of you? Like, you're talking about something that, you know, you're talking about like Ryan Adams or something. Or something like, I'm just using it as like, where somebody was in the news, or Louis, anybody you want to mention, okay? And the two people might fundamentally agree, like, well, that was bad, but they might have differing levels of engagement with how bad it is. Or they will look at, say, what's going on like now with like Nancy Pelosi and AOC or something, and the two people are both Democrats, and they both kind of view themselves as progressives, but they see one person as too radical and one person as too reactionary. Is it acceptable to be that, like, I am not, our relationship ends because of this construction? But, you know, I think that is a real problem, because in some ways we are the sum total of what we say and what we believe, but in another way, that those are just things that are, if not arbitrary, capricious and flexible, and that you can think something. That's another thing, an ethical problem we have, like sort of understanding how to deal with the past, knowing that the world has changed. Is it moral or ethical or just reasonable to hold somebody in something's action from 1988 to the standard of now? You know, that's a hard question. Yeah.
And a lot of friendships end over these types of politics.
I bet they do. I mean, I think that they do. Although that you might, I suppose, also suggest that maybe those friendships weren't really friendships to begin with, because if they were allyships in a way. It was like these people have a relationship based on this shared idea, and because their idea is splintered, the relationship has splintered. You know, you'd like to think that you would be able to sort of stay in that relationship and have that difference, but that's less desirable now. Like, people don't want that experience. Like, they don't want to have a friendship and then a debate and then a return to the friendship. They don't really want that to happen. I'm not sure what changed. Like, I don't know. And people say it's generational, but I don't know if that, it could be. It could be particularly the way changes we've made in how we raise kids. And I think also the experience that people have who are native to technology, that probably has changed it too. But it is a bit mysterious. Yeah.
Speaking of native to technology, you referenced Black Mirror a couple times in some interviews that you did, and that this book has some parallels to that.
Well, yeah, if somebody says, like, what are these stories like? I say, like, well, they're kind of like Black Mirror or Twilight Zone, just because that's a shorthand way of describing it, and I don't think it's inaccurate, yeah.
Do you like Black Mirror?
I love it.
You do?
Yeah.
So that's a nice parallel. You're happy when...
Oh, sure. Okay. I mean, it's like, to me, the reason I like Black Mirror and the Twilight Zone, and the thing that I would say is similar about this book is, you know, in kind of traditional short story writing, there are characters and the characters evolve. And the plot mechanics are the story. But in my stories, much like those episodes, the idea is the story, okay? The main thing that interests me is sort of like, I guess what they call world building or whatever, like the reality in which these things are happening, which is most of the time the world we live in now, with a few adjustments or a few things that have skewed. Like I like science fiction, but I like terrestrial science fiction. I'm not interested in what's going on in space. Like, I want it to happen here. Yeah.
It's funny because you develop characters when you write your nonfiction pieces. A lot of it's character development. So this is kind of a little bit of a switch, because when you're doing an interview with Billy Joel or something like that, it's all about figuring out back to who that person is. Is it their ideas or?
Well, because I was also influenced by, like, Alfred Hitchcock. If you watch a lot of Alfred Hitchcock movies, he has character types. They're like, Jimmy Stewart plays a type of person in those movies, or, like, you know, Kim Novak is a type of person. They're not this thing where this is we're not seeing the growth of this individual. We're not seeing, you know, they may change due to the circumstances, but that's not the center of it. I mean, it's like if you watch Vertigo or whatever, the way Jimmy Stewart's behavior, though strange at times, is predictable. Because you look at this person, you're like, I understand what this person is like. He's the kind of person who will follow this woman. He will just follow her because he's curious and because he doesn't necessarily think it's wrong of him to do that. It's a type of person. It's not so much a person that's never existed before.
Fair enough. Archetypes. So, fictional, nonfiction, would you like to see other authors sort of adopt this terminology? You kind of invented something.
I didn't invent anything. I mean, fictional nonfiction, that's almost like an in-joke to myself, because what is fictional nonfiction? Well, that's fiction. What would non-fictional fiction be? That'd be fiction. I just thought it was dumb to put stories at the bottom. So I just thought it'd be kind of, and it's consciously confusing. Everyone is confused by it. They want to know what it means, and it's always like, well, here's what it means, like nothing. But when I want to see other people do it, I don't know. I guess never thought of that.
Is it a new genre? Is there going to be a section in the bookstore?
I don't know. I doubt it. I guess if on the one hand, if other people started doing it, I'd be like, oh, I had some influence. But on the other hand, somebody would certainly do it better than me. And then I would be like the guy who helped the other guy or the woman become good at this thing. So I guess I never think of it. It's hard to, it's strange. It's like I don't know, maybe it's not strange. It's like, but when people talk about writers musicians, filmmakers, the natural tendency is to compare them to other people, and that's supposed to be a compliment, and it always almost is, from the person giving the compliment. But as the recipient, even though you know it's a compliment, it doesn't always feel great because you're really trying to be something that hasn't existed before. I mean, I've used this example like a million times, but to me, it's similar to like if someone started a band and someone went up to the band and was like, "You guys are awesome. You sound exactly like the Beatles." Then it'd be like, "Well, that's great if you're a Beatles tribute band, but the Beatles already exist. We don't, you know." Unless the movie Yesterday, I guess, contradicts this, but it's like,
so one of the topics, sort of at the latter half of the book that you discuss, and something that I think would be interesting to hear your opinion on, is you bring up this really broad topic, which is why do we exist and why do other people exist? And you kind of frame this question. Do you have thoughts on why we're here?
Like, do I know?
Do you know?
Well, the thing in that story is that there's, it's very common for everyone in this room at some point. Maybe if you were real smart, maybe it happened when you were 11. Maybe it didn't happen to you until you were out of college. Maybe it's not happening to you until now, but you thought like, well, why do I exist? It's a common thing people ask. But I think that the question that's less often asked is, why do the other people exist? Because you're trying to find meaning for your own life. And then the question is the meaning for your life, if there is one, is that the meaning for you, or is that the collective meaning we all have? So if you conclude from your life, like, the reason I live is to say, to make the world a better place. Well, then you would think, well, that should be that's the reason everyone's living, okay? But what if you don't think that? I mean, what if you think that your reason for living is to sort of understand what life was like in the Bronze Age, and you become a researcher and an archaeologist, and you believe that your reason for living is that you're going to help us understand what life in the Bronze Age was like. It'd be weird if you're like, that's everybody's reason for living, Then if you accept that your reason for living is specific and unique, then so is everybody else's. And that's weird to think about. If you start thinking about your friends, and you start thinking, what is their purpose for living? What would they say, and what do you think it is?
And we'll never know, right?
We'll never know.
At this point, I'd like to invite anyone who has a question up to the two microphones in the aisles. Oh, we have one. We have a hot one.
Hi, thanks for coming to talk with us. So, I've always been fascinated by your relationship with Bill Simmons.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I listen to your podcast all the time. I think his best podcasts are the one you're on, so please go on more. But I was kind of curious, in your Grantland days, did you guys have like major creative differences? It seemed like you started it, but you didn't contribute over the long haul. Obviously, that site went by the wayside. Just kind of curious as to like what's your relationship on a creative level with him, and how did that differ?
Well, first of all, thanks for liking those podcasts and listening to them. I appreciate that. And it's a weird thing. So Bill and I started doing stuff together professionally before we were friends. Like, the first time we did a podcast was probably the third time we'd ever spoken. But I will admit the chemistry was real good. And a lot of people heard that and assumed that we were not just friends, but probably best friends. And because it kind of worked that way.
Like us.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. It's just palpable. It's like, so then, we kind of did become friends because of that over time. And then when he was going to start Grantland, it's always weird to say, like, I was a co-founder of Grantland. Like, I was there. Like, it was his thing. Like, I was the first guy he hired.
That's what founder is. You just have to be
there. I mean, I was the first guy he hired, and I would like to think that I did a lot in terms of putting the original people together and stuff. But it really is his thing, because it was like, he had the leverage. But then we're working together, and then we became like, now our relationship is technically professional, but we're talking all the time. So our relationship is getting closer and closer and closer. And then Grantland was a very successful thing, but it felt different for me than it did for him. For me, I guess I can't really say what it felt like for him, but for me, it was almost like I felt that I was moving in this direction as a writer where I needed to be more in myself. Like I had to get away from the idea that the perception of my work dictated whether or not it was good or not. And now when you write publicly, one thing that has changed about journalism is it used to be, like you'd have the idea for the story, you would report the story, you would write the story, you would edit the story, and it would be published, and that was the end. Now this is the middle. Now, because of the internet, there's a whole second part of it. And I don't like that. I don't enjoy that experience. And Bill likes he loves the idea of a team and a group. And, he's a very, very good boss because of that. He has authentic loyalty to the people who work for him, and people have a loyalty back to him. And he has an understanding of the populace that I do not. One time Malcolm Gladwell years ago said, Bill Simmons is the most popular writer in America. And I was like, well, that can't be right. But he is. Because there are a ton of people who didn't read anything but him. He was the only, their entire relationship to literature was him. So he's working on this big magnitude that's always getting bigger. And I was almost going the opposite way. Not because I'm not like an indie rocker or something, and I'm trying to make. It didn't seem like it was good for what I was doing. Was there creative tension? Maybe a little bit. There was, although not. That wasn't why I kind of moved away. I wasn't enjoying the experience, and it seemed as though I was a little too old for it. I think if I had been 30, I would have it would have spent my whole life, But I was just a little bit older, and I felt like it didn't seem like, I felt like I was doing something that wasn't natural. And then I got the ethicist job. And then I was so I started pulling away, and I never pulled away completely. Even at the end of Grantland, I don't know if I was even being paid anymore. I think because I kept reducing my salary because it felt weird to be taking this money and not, doing less and less. I think Bill really thought that I would be the principal writer for the site. That I would, that we'd have a whole bunch of writers, but I would always be there, and I just kept writing less and less and less, so I kept reducing my salary. And we would talk about, there would be some political interoffice things that would happen, and I think that he would talk to me because I could give him more of a straight answer. There's a big power imbalance between a lot of him and a lot of people who work for him, who are very, very smart people, but they know that, he runs the show, whereas it was less for us. So I don't know if that answers your question. We have a big overlap in our audience. If there's a Venn diagram, there's a big overlap, and yet I think that that has happened for reasons that aren't really connected to the way we write. I think it was other things. I think the fact that you've recognized that this podcast relationship, I think people like that. They really like that. It makes his readers interested in me and vice versa. Yeah.
So you're pretty prolific. You've done fiction, you've done nonfiction, you've done journalism. What else do you want to do? Do you see yourself branching into film and TV? You mentioned some of these other sort of creative pursuits. What keeps you passionate?
Sometimes I think about that. People often say, why don't you write a screenplay or something, or just try it, especially now with television. There's never been more opportunities to write television. I think I heard someone say that, this year coming up in LA, there are 240 pilots for dramas. There are 240 potential shows that are just drama, So, because there's now you have the networks, and you have all of cable, and you have Amazon, and you have Netflix, and all these things. But I always sign 2-book contracts. This is the first of the 2 books, so I have another book to write. And also, I like doing this. It seems to suit my personality. Why don't I keep doing it? I'm real lucky that this happened. There's an old line by Mitch Hedberg. Mitch Hedberg is talking about being a stand-up comedian. And he's like, it's weird. You get successful as a stand-up comedian. You work your whole life to be a comedian. You get good at it. And as soon as you get good at it, people want you to do other things. Can you write? Can you act? It's they're connected to comedy, but they're not the same. It'd be kind of like if you spent your whole life being a chef and you got really good at cooking, and they were like, all right, this is good. Can you farm? And it's kind of like that. It's like people always want me to do something that's kind of like what I do, but it's not the main thing I do, so
Well, the main thing you do is great. This collection of stories is great. I encourage everyone to go pick up a copy of Raised in Captivity, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me here. Okay.